Hey, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, sometimes, we bring on interesting guests to help the nonprofit world, small, medium-sized nonprofits. And sometimes the individuals we bring on are bringing with them heavy-hitting issues and items to discuss. I am beyond excited about our guest today. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be entertaining. She's quickly becoming one of my favorite human beings that I've had the pleasure of meeting with on the interwebs during this global pandemic. Nneka Allen is our guest today. She is the founder of the Empathy Agency. She is a fundraising executive for over 20 plus years of experience. And she's also a recent co-editor and one of 14 contributing authors of Collecting Courage. We're going to talk about this as a book today. Nneka Allen, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I'm really pleased to be here.
Not as pleased as I am to have you as a guest. You and I have chatted before as we sort of got to know each other, and I'm excited about the challenging conversation we're going to have. We just got done with Black History Month. And one of the things that you and I discussed a lot in our pre-conversations is this idea of race and equality within the nonprofit world. And We'll go over a whole bunch of different angles, and we'll go down whatever rabbit hole you want to chase down. But before we do that, because I'm going to tease that out, if somebody's scrolling through iTunes or scrolling through YouTube, they want to know a little bit about Nneka Allen. This topic fascinates them. They want to roll with it. But they don't know you yet.
Yeah.
Give them a 5,000-foot view on who you are, what you do, and why we're having a conversation today.
Sure, Patrick. Well, I refer to myself as a relationship builder, a stone catcher, and a freedom fighter. I'm an Afro-Indigenous woman. I'm a proud mama of a beautiful 25-year-old daughter. I'm a 6th-generation Canadian. I'm a daughter of the Underground Railroad. I'm a descendant of American slavery. And my family's been in Canada for nearly 200 years and in North America for almost 450 years. My 3rd great-grandfathers arrived on the shores of Amherstburg, Ontario, which is about 20 minutes from Detroit, Michigan, in the 1840s, escaping slavery. As a lover of justice, I've pursued, charitable endeavors and inspired philanthropy for for 22 years. I started my career in community museums, and I spent the last 15 years in healthcare. My experience as a Black woman in the charitable sector over the last 22 years is really the foundation for my activism and the reason why I've recently transitioned full-time into racial equity coaching through the Empathy Agency. That's a little bit about me. I mean, there's lots to say, but I think that's it.
That laundry list right out of the gate, and you're like, okay, now we're rolling. It's super interesting. I'd like to kind of start off the conversation. Let's start heavy. I don't care. I, as you've noticed, am not of any racial background except for like the European kind. Mm-hmm. My lighting is getting me extra pasty today to make the point, I guess. Is as a middle-aged white guy in the philanthropy industry. I am both curious about how to bring up and converse about racial equality. At the same time, I don't necessarily have any desire to be white savior complex kind of individual. I know we've been listening since sort of George Floyd happened, especially here in the Midwest, the murder of George Floyd in the Twin Cities. But as somebody in my sector who looks like me and talks like me and acts like me, where the hell do I start to begin to help? And where do I go for first? I think in the nonprofit industry, we just don't know what to do, and there's not a lot of direction. And as somebody who kind of fits my profile, what do I do to begin a conversation with individuals like you on how to understand better racial equality within the nonprofit world?
So, I mean, you said a lot just
that's
there.
That's a lot of things. Brevity is not my strong suit. That's why I have a podcast. Yeah.
A lot of things are coming to mind. So, I think it's really important that first we understand that race is a construct. And so when you say, I don't have any racial sort of makeup, you do. Whiteness, being white, is a race. And it was created the same way Blackness was created, right? And so I think that is a really important starting point to explore and to understand better. I think also when we say, how do we do this work? How do we address this topic in the philanthropic sector? We also need to understand that the philanthropic sector is just a microcosm of society.
Yeah.
Right? So the sector isn't this way for magical reasons. It is this way because it is a product of the broader society. So I think understanding the broader societal context and how that has specifically influenced the sector is really important learning and understanding to have. All of that is really important as we begin to explore racial segregation, racial injustice, racial inequity. I heard you say racial equality, and so I want to draw a delineation between racial equality and racial equity. Racial equality says like we're all the same, which we know that that's not true, right? Racial equity is really looking at the specific issues that disproportionately affect people of color and creating mechanisms to even the playing field. The reality is we don't all start from the same starting point. And so equity is about equalizing or balancing that out. And so for me, the goal is always equity, or I should say that, my pursuit is in the direction of equity. My ultimate goal is justice. Mm-hmm. So that's a lot of sort of context setting that is required. And there's no real fast way to go about understanding context other than to be really curious. And so, one of the first things that I would recommend is beginning to ask why a lot about the things that are just, you don't consider in your life, or the things you see that puzzle you, or things that challenge you. Begin to ask why and begin to pursue knowledge about those things. As you do that, the role for you becomes one of the active listener. And so I know on this topic and in this work, many people feel the pressure and the urge to want to go do something. And you can't go do something until you understand the issue.
I think there might be an occasion where, I think more often than not, is even if there are individuals who are curious about root causes, there is a sense of, well, if I'm ignorant to the fact that I don't know this at all, I don't, asking the question is going to unveil some of the things that I haven't paid attention to, or I never was taught in school, or I never learned, or I'm only beginning to pursue. And so now I have a very juvenile sense of knowledge, in where I'm an expert in a whole bunch of other things. And now I'm just so unbelievably behind where I should have been or need to be in order to eventually fix the problem, right? Because I think us in the nonprofit sector, and again, I know we're in a microcosm of society as a whole, but as nonprofit leaders, we're usually fixers, right? I have a problem, I'm gonna fix it. So I need to know as much as I can to do, and then I'm gonna put my foot forward and go. Because if I can't fix the problem, then that's the issue, rather than understanding it in the first place. And if I have to understand it, well, then I don't know enough, which I feel terrible about. And then that is going to get into the back of my brain of like, well, am I a horrible person for not even understanding the problem in the first place? So how do we get over that first hump? Because I think that's really a big challenge for individuals who don't spend time thinking about racial equity, which I don't, because I don't need to. And I don't mean that in a horrible way. My life does not revolve around it. And so the pursuit of it is challenging because I have to understand that I don't know anything. I don't shit about this. So
Yeah.
how do I start?
Yeah. So it's interesting because let's think about it outside of the context of race. You know, when we want to pursue knowledge about something we don't know anything about, we need to approach that new topic with humility.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So name a topic that, you know, something you don't know how to do.
Right. Tennis. I don't know.
Right. So tennis. Okay. If you
By the way,
want to
that
learn
was like,
how to
by the way, the whitest answer I've ever given in my entire life. That was like the worst example ever.
Nothing, that's okay. It still works because, you know, if you want to learn how to play tennis, you certainly cannot expect to show up on the tennis court and perform like Serena Williams.
Right.
And you will not be, you won't punish yourself, or you won't even have those expectations.
Right.
You will sort of set the context. What do we do when we enter into these situations and we know we don't know? We usually say, I've never done this before.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We just admit the thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, you know, on the topic of race, although it is far more complicated than tennis,
Yeah.
there is an applicable parallel in that we need to approach the subject with humility,
Mm-hmm.
knowing we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Being willing to say that we don't know. I mean, that in itself is challenging in a society that promotes individualism, right? And perfectionism.
Yeah.
Being able to say, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm gonna find out, and I'm going to apply myself to understanding this better and taking responsibility for your own learning, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I facilitate a course at the University of British Columbia called Anti-Racism Strategies for the Workplace. And oftentimes, after we get through the module about the Indigenous history around genocide here in Canada and the 200 years of slavery in Canada, which most Canadians, by the way, don't know about, the vast majority of the learners are angry because they feel like the education system has let them down.
Mm-hmm.
The education system has let them down. And anger or resentment or frustration over that is pretty normal response. And that's sort of like module 1, right. 1.3, right? And we still got a ways to go, right? And so what do? They lean in. Mm-hmm. They lean in to begin to deal with and confront all the information they didn't know and begin to sort of reorganize themselves around it, which is quite an exercise, right? It is. So I think if we take it out of race for a minute, though, it helps us like just organize ourselves around what do we do when we want to learn something new?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Going back to the anger part too. Mm-hmm. I think it's a feeling that in the nonprofit world specifically, we don't like to address or talk about, right? We're angry about a problem, but then we immediately like, all right, that's fine. Let's move on, right? And you said something earlier is that this takes time. Yeah. There's not an immediate resolution to your own brain power. And I think if you're a nonprofit leader, you're talking about fundraising, for example, this is, if you want to wrap your head around from start to finish, from the first person time you meet somebody to the time that they give you a major gift, doesn't happen overnight. It has got to take time. So put this into kind of maybe a perspective. But at points, you're probably going to get frustrated with the fact that either you want to move forward quickly or and then it doesn't work as well because, again, you don't know context and history or whatever, or you're going to bump into roadblocks of people who like, why are we even like, what? It's not even a big deal anymore. It's past, it's history past. So your roadblock, I would love to get your thoughts on, and maybe this is a donor, maybe this is a board member, and maybe if you're trying to talk about this in the nonprofit world, which I'd really like to discuss a little bit, but like you're going to bump into roadblocks or people who are probably going to tell you, yeah, but that happened in the past. This doesn't happen anymore. We're well past it. Why are we living in that time frame when we can just move forward now?
Well, I mean, so I would suggest that the person who's saying that probably doesn't share a similar outlook with me
Right.
around why the world is the way that it is. But the reality is that the history of North America, the Americas for that matter, must be understood so that we can understand what is in fact happening today. So you referenced the murder of George Floyd. How do we understand why a police officer was perfectly comfortable in the middle of the street with several civilians yelling and asking him to stop? Why was he okay and had great confidence while killing a Black man in broad daylight while being recorded? That doesn't happen for no reason. There's a historical reality that is attached to that manifestation of behavior. And so there's no way in the world that the things that are happening today are unrelated to the historical context. You know, in Canada, when we begin to look at, you know, the charitable sector and what Black serving organizations are receiving, it is a meager 0.7% of total grants. This is between the years of 2017 and 2018. And that's Black serving. If it's Black led, it goes down to 0.07%. This is right now. That is not for, again, no reason. When you begin to look at, you know, other statistics related to Black Canadians, you know, new immigrants and third generation Canadians both make significantly less than white Canadians, like on average around 30+% less. Like, you know, unemployment rate for Black Canadians, double. Like over 90% of Black people would like to go to university, only 59% think they will. We live in a highly segregated society today. That is a result and a manifestation of historical segregation.
And so when you look at that too, and if you point that out, and there are still people like, well, I mean, then they should just move. And I'm giving you the basics of the answers of that, you know, typical, you know, you can call them a-holes, whatever, you don't want to do that, but it's just, hey, I lived in a different part of town too, back in my day. I just went to the west side or whatever. They can do the same thing. In a dismissive tone like that, how do you balance that conversation, or is it something you just avoid and you go to somebody who is more empathetic in their thinking? Because you're gonna those roadblocks are always gonna, they're the loudest, first of all, they're the most obnoxious, and they're usually the ones who are more aggressive in not wanting to know or understand or care in the first place.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So in the work that I do through racial equity coaching, you know, I begin with identity work, because the work of racial equity is really a personal work. It's an internal work first. You have to do internal work before you can do any external work. And so this is a bit of a guide for who we're going to engage around this very important topic. People who are really serious about wanting to affect change, right? And so starting with identity is really key and important, because understanding who you are and how you came to be who you are, and what influences that, and the fact that it is fluid and it changes with, you know, life circumstances and a variety of other things, is all really important things to understand. And then fitting that into the context of maybe your national context, maybe it's world context, it just depends, right? So you can understand the role that you're playing, and then being exposed to people who have different identities makes the environment far more conducive for a conversation to locate oneself, to locate other people, to understand the impacts of the society on either. Yeah, that is the best way to begin those sorts of conversations. And I mean, it's not lost on me. We are not regularly invited to begin to explore our identity, right, as we begin these conversations. But here's what I know is true. Identity influences culture, and culture is directly tied to equity outcomes. And so that is true for the individual, and that is also true for our organizations. And so in our charitable organizations, the culture we create is manifested by the identities of the people who are in power. And so when our frontline workers, fundraisers or program people who are, people of color, Black people, and they are experiencing or clash with the culture in the organization, you see how we can trace it back to identity. And that work doesn't happen outside yourself. You're the only one who can do the work.
When there are individuals who are in positions of power who have no consequence of whatever their voting action is, and because I think people have the attention span of gnats, that you so easily forget either a vote against or a dismissive piece within politics or even leadership within the nonprofit, right? So like, hey, this is great. We're gonna do, I'm so glad that Nneka's gonna come. We're gonna do racial equity training. It's gonna be great. And like a survey of how your employees did, right? 3 weeks later, we're on to another fire that does not necessarily, relate to racial equity. And so therefore we're all hands on deck. We forget about what we just learned. And because there are no consequences to leadership, because we don't hold anybody accountable for these things, and because we have that short attention span, we forget about it. And we're back to where we started because we don't, but what are I going to do? Like, you're going to remind people about this? How do we continuously then be purposeful? Is it our individual jobs to hold everybody accountable? And how do we begin that conversation as well? Because I know that there's do-gooders within there. We want to do amazing things. We want to continue on. It's hard to keep up with an exercise regimen. This is an exercise regimen for your own sort of internal growth pattern too. That's a problem if it's not front of mind all the time. How do we make it front of mind?
So there's a couple of things here. You led with accountability, which is often a value that a lot of our charitable organizations espouse, or at least they're on their walls.
That's what they say.
Right? And so raising that is really important, because the work of identifying your values sits right at the heart, along with identity and culture. And it's values. It's through the prism of our values that we should be determining the work that we do, how we do the work, right? How we measure the work, what the work is, right? We know, according to Brene Brown, only 10% of organizations operationalize their values. Right. 10%. So one very serious way that we can begin to hold ourselves accountable is through understanding our values and begin to apply the prism of our values to all that we do. I also want to bring you back to what I was saying about this being an individual work. Starting with identity and doing that work and beginning to understand how the culture you create impacts yourself and impacts other people. That's the sort of work that changes you. It doesn't leave you the same. And so, like anything that is profound in your life, you don't often need someone to remind you about that.
I think in the nonprofit sector, especially too, in order to do the best possible work, whether it's fundraising or it's programming, you have to have a perspective that understands those that you serve or the community in which you are serving in the first place. And so it's almost it might be an obligation to understand how best you can serve by taking a look at yourself, and if you are beginning to understand the root causes of those that you are trying to raise money for and serve. This isn't a band-aid on top of these things, and you are not coming in to sweep in, but at least you can, when you're having conversations with potential donors or board members or community members about your purpose to make the community better, if it's coming from a place where you haven't been self-reflective on, am I part of the problem in the first place? And have I done enough to understand where my conversations need to start? Well, then are you really doing yourself and your community a service, or are you just doing surface work? And if you're just doing surface work, well, then great. Then when you leave, the other person gets to do surface work. It's like repaving the roads. You're not tearing up the damn road. You're just putting another blacktop on there and moving on with your life, right? Looks nice. Hey, it looks really clean. Got all the lines on it. Oh man, this is great. Smooth for the first couple of months until winter hits, and then all of a sudden there's potholes.
Exactly. You know, so much about that imagery works for me. Sorry, you see, I'm getting lost in the metaphor, and like completely lost in metaphor. Yeah, the work of racial equity is an invitation to have proximity to pain.
That's scary.
I don't know if that resonates for you, but what you just described about understanding who we serve and what's important to them and how do we best serve requires you to have proximity. And many of our organizations are structured to prevent proximity.
Right.
And so we can't even ask ourselves those questions that you just posed because we don't know and we don't want to know. So it takes real leadership, not just people who have a title, not just people who have credentials or education or, you know, a vision, but real leaders to keep at the forefront of their mind their purpose. And for charitable organizations, our purpose is to solve problems for people.
I wonder if this is in the nonprofit world, we do hard work. Hard because we're underfunded. It's hard because we work multiple hours and we're just trying to do the best we can with what we have. And this, to get to a root of something else, becomes harder work. But but that harder work at the start makes your rest of the work, I would imagine, easier because at least you know the hell you're trying to accomplish in the first place, and it's less confusing. And there's no if you're working for homelessness, if you're working for like food inequality, if you're looking for rent equity or whatever the case may be, if you know the root cause and you're self-reflective on your role within this, I think that makes the hard work that you're doing currently a lot easier, even though it's harder work to get to the root of that issue. But if you're thinking long-term, like let's say my whole life is going to be a lot easier if I know a lot more about this, because I don't have to think or take different pathways to have conversations with donors that kind of scratch here and get on the surface and be not to the root, or at least trying to get as deep as you possibly can to the root.
I absolutely agree that, you know, it is more work and there is a concentration of work up front, but also I think that our work, whether it be, you know, on the programming side or on the fundraising side, is made more complicated when we apply, and we do apply, an individualistic approach to this work. There are many examples over history of movements that included many people contributing in a variety of ways, including through philanthropy. A really phenomenal book that just came out last year, Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving, documents a great example of what I'm talking about. And so, you know, the way my community organizes around philanthropy is very different. It is based in communalism and sacrificial giving and upliftment, the collective upliftment of our people. And so I love what you're saying about getting to the root, because when you start to deal with the root of the issue, you can begin to create a movement. And when you create a movement and you're effective at communicating around the movement, you can attract a larger base of people. You know, this notion that we need to be relying on just major donors to fund everything we do, in my estimation, is flawed. And it is not sustainable.
They're fickle. They go away.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And you know, our root issue may never get addressed as long as it's like the tail wagging the dog.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? We're not here to just accumulate wealth. We're here to create change, provide solutions to problems that you know, impact people. And we use money to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't want to use your money to help us do that, that's okay.
Yeah.
But this is what we're doing.
That's another hard conversation to have internally as a nonprofit leader.
Sure is.
You're going to have individuals who might want to help on the surface, but when the conversation then turns to why the hell we're helping in the first place, because, you know, historically speaking, we got ourselves into this mess in the first place, and that it is historically, you know, it's systematic and it's systemic, and it is all the whatever buzzwords you want to throw at it. It's our fault that we're in this mess in the first place, historically speaking. And now you have to have a conversation with a donor that might not agree necessarily with your assessment, and they just want to feel good about what they're doing in a very surface level gift of, and it might be a lot of money. And you have to then have a conversation that our organization understands that this route is a little deeper, and we're going to do this, and we're not going to do this, and we still want your support. And there's a possibility that that individual or that family says, no, I don't like where you're going with this. This doesn't seem like it is necessary. This gets icky. It makes me feel gross.
Mm-hmm.
That's now that's a real hard one. If you're going to live by your values that you and your organization came up with, now you have to deal with the consequences of addressing that head on. What advice would you give to someone who is trying to be as strong as possible, but also confronting the reality that donors might not like having this conversation?
So a couple things, you know, one, I don't believe that, you know, this is the work of a single individual. So a fundraiser trying to explain it to a donor. Really, the organization needs to be communicating very clearly about what their work is. That alone will be a separator, yes. Right? Too often I have worked in organizations who don't want to speak plainly about what it is they do and why. Oh. If we got clear about that, and then got really effective at communicating about that, that would weed out a lot of what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And while on one hand, there may be people who don't want to support that anymore, or don't want to support your organization anymore, there is a flip side to that. And there are people you have not traditionally attracted. There are people who may discover you for the first time because now you're actually speaking clearly about who you are, and it resonates with them. So while we may lose someone, we may gain a whole group of people. I think we want to be looking at those things in a balanced way.
I think as hard and as tough and as this sucks. This conversation sucks. I mean, I think it's okay to say that. That sucks. I have to address it. This sucks. I have to think about it, and I might not personally have had anything to do with this. Yeah, you did, because you're enjoying, the fruits of these particular things. I think it sucks. What I love is that you have flipped it into a positive thing, and that anybody who works in the nonprofit sector is always looking for that glass half full sort of moment. And I love that you have given permission in the sense to think about it as a joyful experience, to say, we're going to go and bring other people on board who we didn't have any clue existed, who are going to champion our organization for doing this kind of work. And we're going to, slough off the old, and, we're coming up on Easter here, right? So we're thinking, oil and bread and all that good stuff with this. Let's get to church here. Well, I think we can think about that, right? So now we're off with the old and in with the new, and now our organization is refreshed. And once you have that refreshing feeling, it's like starting a brand new job over. You've got a brand new sort of motivating factor to go out and then talk about how you're going to do this work as you now understand a little better on how we got there in the first place.
Yes. And, in order to keep it fresh and alive, that proximity to pain is vital. The proximity to the problem has to remain. From where I sit and in my own experience, nobody understands the experience of joy while in the midst of pain better than Black people. And so, I was raised to not be afraid of being in proximity to the pain. It's what keeps me grounded. It is what keeps me clear on who I am. It keeps me clear on humanness and the human condition. It keeps me clear on how I should be showing up for people, the role I can play. I mean, if you reveal a need in a clear and concise way, most people can figure out what role they can play in the solution. Right? So when you have that proximity to pain, your eyes are open to what is happening around you. It forces you outside of yourself. And there's no greater motivator for joy than the looking outside of yourself. And I think that holds true individually for sure, but I think it also holds true as it relates to our organizations. Our organizations are meant to serve a societal purpose. And that societal purpose is usually rooted in injustice of some form, lack of access, lack of equity, right? And unless we stay focused on that, we will navel gaze and think we are the greatest.
And it's so fun to hear what could be and how we could feel if we get closer to why in the first place. And that almost sparks a more appreciating sort of life that you then lead, knowing that at least you're A, understanding, and B, here's where you are, right? You might be close and within close proximity to sort of this painful truth that we always sort of like work around with. But then how much does that make you grateful for living in the time that you are living in and having the things that you are experiencing yourself? And does that bring you better joy to go to work every day and sort of talk about, how individuals can help? Now you get to spread again that joy and that positive sort of route that you always wanted to do and work in the nonprofit industry, but you got to get through that trial first internally, and then I want to be kind of happy go lucky sort of thing, and know that you're making a difference and you're just not scratching the surface. You're not just doing this artificially.
That's exactly right. I think as humans, we want to actually be connected to something bigger than ourselves. The notion of happiness is circumstantial. Joy comes from a very deep place of knowing and being connected. Yeah.
I would be remiss if I did not once again mention a brand new book that you have co-edited and co-authored with 14 individuals, Collecting Courage. If I'm looking at a bookshelf and I need to fill it with something, and I'm looking at Collective Courage, tell me a little bit about this and what sparked and what can I expect when I read in depth this book?
Oh, wow. So Collecting Courage is an anthology, as you said, of 14 Black voices, 9 of which are Canadian fundraisers and 5 American. And the book explores the experience of Black fundraisers through the themes of joy, pain, freedom, and love. And interestingly enough, we didn't set out to write a book. We 2 years ago in 2018, I wrote a proposal to AFP Global suggesting that they might want to consider including Black Canadian female voices in the work that they're doing. And that if that was something they were interested in, we could help them out. And so they took us up on that.
Ah.
And out of that came the project Our Right to Heal, which was a collection of 10 first-person narratives by Black women fundraisers in Canada, talking about their healing process as it relates to the racism they've experienced. And we also did a learning video on the difference between inclusion and belonging. And that project was supposed to launch in January of 2020. And it got delayed and it was going to come out in February, but we as a group said, let's not put it in Black History Month. After all, there are 11 other months. And so it was supposed to come out in March. Well, we all know what happened last March, COVID. And so it got delayed again. So of course, I was thinking, is this project ever going to launch? Like, really? We'd only been working on it for 1.5 years at that point. And finally in May, it launched. It launched 1 week before the murder of George Floyd. No one could have predicted that timing. And the world literally opened up in a receptive way to the voices of Black people. And as a result, and in response to Our Right to Heal, a colleague of ours, Gail Pico, was also in the process of launching the charity report and also creating her own imprint under Civil Sector Press. And she had mentioned to us, a few months prior, that she was always interested in having a book written about fundraising while Black. And it wasn't until she read Our Right to Heal that it really just all came together for her. And so she picked up the phone and called my sister friend, Nicole Salmon, fellow co-editor, and said, like, I'm serious now. I want to talk to you guys about a book. And so Nicole called me. I put out a call to our Black Canadian Fundraisers Collective, and we chose Black authors from the United States who represent our sister organizations to contribute as well. And so by July, we had signed a book deal. And in August, we started writing. And interestingly enough, the only time we came together as an authors group was to just determine who was going to write under what theme. And then we dispersed. And the authors didn't get a chance to read what the other authors had written until the book was published in November, maybe a week before it was made public. And the thing that I it's hard for me as an editor, is I've read these stories many, many, many times. But the authors have said, and other readers have said, it is just phenomenal, the thread of connective tissue that exists throughout every single story. And the interesting thing when you look at the identities of the authors, we all have very distinct backgrounds. I am the only descendant of the Underground Railroad, who is writing in this book. We have people from all over the world. So the diversity of Blackness is displayed. And the interesting thing is, no matter what part of the world you're hailing from, when you put us in the context of North America, our experience of racism is shockingly similar. And so this book is a testimony to those experiences. But from my perspective, it's also a testimony to the strength and the beauty and the commitment to philanthropy that these fundraisers maintain in some of the most traumatic experiences. And for me, that just really informs and supports our historic position and understanding of philanthropy and our role in it.
I'm glad you did that, because I can't. That was awesome. And again, I think what's great about this too is for those who are in the nonprofit world who are looking for perspective, who are looking for starting conversations, who are looking at, ask the question that I said at the top, like, I don't know where to start. Like, I know I need to do this. I know that my industry requires me to have a better understanding, or at least a better starting point, and understanding like what the hell is going on here that we've, that's been so in our face revealed over the last couple of months. Which I think that to me was, I think, a good starting point for a lot of people, was like, how in the hell is this a thing? Like, right? Like, I grew up in South Minneapolis. I grew, I went, this is like a life that I would lead, and yet still, as a suburb kid, turn a blind eye to a lot of things, or didn't look in different perspectives, because I was, I lived there, but I didn't really live there, kind of thing. And I think that's where I think a lot of us want to have some clarity around, is where in the hell do we start? And you can start by reading, Collecting Courage, and you can start by, following everything that Nneka does, and really beginning to ask internally, sort of like who you are as an individual, kind of what, module number one. I'm going to consider it module number one.
Yes.
Be reflective on who you are and what you are doing, either to perpetuate or to stop some of these things that you are inherently and probably unwittingly doing that it's not beneficial to anybody or anything, regardless of whatever race or equity that you're trying to accomplish. I think that's a good step one.
Absolutely. I mean, in Collecting Courage, if people aren't sure what racism looks like, there are a number of examples of what it looks like, which helps us. I mean, stories help us make meaning of the world, right? And so it's through narrative that we're able to think back on things that we've witnessed, things that we may have been a part of. Not sure what was going on. Sometimes you just have a yucky feeling. We're not sure what's happening. Okay, I gotta go. As you read the book, those things might come back to you, right? And so there's a learning that happens around, what does this look like? What does this feel like for the person who is on the receiving end, right? What role could I be playing in the next time this happens? One of the learners in my class said something really phenomenal a couple of days ago, and that was, she practices what she's going to say the next time she sees racism occur. She was like, I have to practice it so that I have that muscle memory. And so when I panic and when it gets really uncomfortable and I don't know what to say, I've rehearsed it. I have it.
Same way you rehearse when you bump into a donor, you talk about your mission. This is something that you can easily rehearse. I love that as a muscle memory thing. Nneka, I'm a happier person knowing you, first of all. I am so blessed that you're on the podcast today. Excited to finally jump in both feet to the book for Collecting Courage. We're going to put that on how you can get it in the show notes. So everybody click on this and get it. How do people get a hold of you if they're interested in you either teaching or speaking or doing some educational pieces at their either nonprofit organization or their business? How do we get a hold of you?
The empathy agency.ca.
Easy peasy.
I made it easy.
I love it. We'll link that down. Thank you so much. This is a longer conversation. I'm sure that you are going to be a recurring guest.
I look forward to it.
To do it. And I'm so excited to A, know you, and B, begin this sort of individual fun little journey too. It's just something you don't think about until you're confronted with it. And then having somebody like you who makes it so accessible and makes it so seem so achievable that we can do this. Because I think that's really one of the weak points. If you don't live it every single day, is I don't know what to do. This seems overwhelming. And as much as it is, you being a guide for this is really wonderful. So I so appreciate you, and thank you so much for being a guest on the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks so much, Patrick.